All right, let's talk about the growth of the church. Um, in the early years of Christianity, let's get rid of that. Early years of Christianity, Jerusalem exercised leadership over the church under James. Um, After 70 CE, with the destruction of the temple, expulsions of Jews, um, uh, Alexandria, cities like Alexandria and Antioch took over this leadership. Bishops of Antioch, Alexandria, Caesarea, and Rome were all considered leaders in the early church. Eventually, the Bishop of Rome can be recognized as the most important leader and finally was designated Pope or Papa, Holy Father, for several reasons. Number one, Simon Peter was the first bishop of Rome, and the Gospels say that Jesus said, Simon Peter, you are the rock on which I will build my church. Number two, Constantine moved his capital from Rome to Byzantium, renaming it Constantinople in 330, left somewhat of a vacuum in Rome, to which the Bishop of Rome could step in and exercise power. And three, the churches in the East were all split by doctrinal debates, these really intellectual, esoteric debates. And no one person could really speak for all of them. But the West was relatively free of controversy, doctrinal controversy, and the Bishop of Rome could voice a widely accepted orthodoxy. So the Bishop of Rome becomes increasingly important. Now, during the period between 64 and 330 CE, Christianity moved through several periods of persecution and acceptance. Theoretically, the empire was tolerant of all religions, but the Christians' exclusive beliefs put them at odds with the Romans, Jews too. In other words, their exclusive religion would not allow them to participate in the public religion or worship the emperor, for example. And this created a problem. Also, crazy stories were told about them, that they ate babies and stuff like that. Nero's persecution was the first. It was localized to Rome and pretty brief. The Emperor Domitian reigned from 81 to 96, insisted that citizens worship his person. He instituted the first widespread persecution of Christians. This persecution may have formed the background for the book of Revelation, the Revelation of John. Widespread persecution also broke out under Hadrian, reigned from 117 to 138. The empire was falling apart from many pressures, and Christians were frequently a scapegoat. This persecution cycle really reached its peak under Diocletian, reigned from 284 to 305. In this case, it was empire-wide and over 10 long years. Now, this was followed by the rule of Constantine, who was not a Christian, but his mother was, and his wife was. And Constantine had a mystical experience. He sees an image in the Battle of Milvian Bridge. He sees the Chi Rho in the sky, and instruction from the transcendent that he is under this banner, that he will be victorious. So he adopts the Chi Rho for his standard, and he is victorious. He takes over the entire empire. And in 313, he issues the Edict of Milan, which gave Christianity the same privileges as other religions. And so the official persecution was over. Now, we don't want to be cynical here, but why would Constantine have sort of grafted on to Christianity? Well, the empire was in trouble, and he was ambitious, and he wanted to save the empire and to reunify it. Perhaps he thought that he needed a powerful empire-wide unifying force, and that Christianity could be this. However, it had to be unified itself first. So in 325, he called the Council of Nicaea to end the warring over the nature of Christ. And of course, the Nicene Creed comes out of this. A few years later, he was baptized while dying. I believe it was his grandson, the Emperor Justinian, who is known as Justinian the Apostate. It means a renunciation of faith. He tried to go back to the old religion, but he was possibly assassinated by a Christian. But by the time of Theodosius, reigned from 379 to 395, Christianity had become the official religion, and all others were suppressed. Very important figure to talk about in these years is Augustine, or Augustine, Saint Augustine. Perhaps no other Christian except Paul influenced Christianity, as did Augustine, who lived from 354 to 430. He was born in North Africa. His mother was a devout Christian. His father was a pagan. As a young man, he was a spiritual seeker. He was a devotee of Manichaeism, which was a world religion for a while. It was a syncretistic combination of Christian and Zoroastrian ideas, a form of Gnosticism. And then he became a devotee of Neoplatonism, of Plato. Had a powerful conversion in Milan under the influence of Bishop Ambrose, returned to North Africa and became a great writer in the Bishop of Hippo, present-day Algeria. He wrote two very important books, Confessions, which arguably is the first autobiography in human history, and The City of God. This was written after the sack of Rome in 410, which greatly shook people up. He found spiritual meaning in this. In many ways, he was the last great Greco-Roman classical thinker. He is widely known for his ideas of original sin, the fall of man, and predestination. Taking his support from Romans, the book of Romans, he believed that Adam and Eve had willfully sinned against God and had passed a sinful nature on to all people. All humankind was incurably sinful and fallen. God, in his infinite mercy, has sent his Son to die for a handful of sinners who were predestined for salvation. This is known as double predestination. They're destined to be damned, but they're also a handful are destined for salvation. The British monk Pelagius refuted this, claiming that humans were free to act and that salvation was partly an act of human will to accept God's grace. This is, I think, the way most Abrahamic believers believe today, but his ideas were later dismissed as Pelagianism, a heresy. And although he was denounced by orthodoxy, predestination never really became orthodoxy either. Its real influence came with John Calvin in the Reformation. More about that later. Another major thing that begins in these early years is the monastic movement. Monk comes from the Greek word monos, meaning alone. If you were monolingual, you speak one language alone. It did not really begin in earnest until the 3rd century. Of course, the New Testament suggests that both Jesus and Paul supported some forms of celibacy, fasting, sharing possessions with the poor. But the first 250 years of Christianity did not have a widespread movement seeking to do this in an organized fashion. The tradition of celibacy for bishops and priests was not established in the Western churches until the late 4th century. It's still not the rule in the Eastern Orthodox Church. The movement toward an ascetic, monastic life appears to have begun in Egypt in the middle of the 3rd century. Egyptian Christians may have been influenced by the asceticism of native Egyptian religion. They may have been influenced by the repudiation of the flesh espoused by the Manichaeans, the Gnostics, and the Neoplatonists. Augustine certainly had some Neoplatonism in his repudiation of the flesh. And so the idea was to flee the world. Fuga mundi means flee the world. The world equals urban comfort, equals evil. So don't think about that. Get away from that. So St. Anthony of the desert, St. Anthony of Egypt, was one of the first to go live in the wild and practice very heroic spirituality. He took Jesus' words about selling his possessions literally. Simeon Stylites, who died in 459, is said to have lived on the top of a pillar in the desert of Syria for 36 years. It's the Greek style for pillar, stylite. Irony is these men, like Simeon and Anthony, attracted people who wanted to be like them. So communities developed around these hermit-like people. Benedict of Nursia lived from 480 to 547. He wrote a rule for monks to sort of guide how these monastic communities should work. His vision was cenobitic life, from the Greek meaning for common life. So not hermits. They lived together. It was not as heroic as perhaps what Anthony or Simeon Stylites did, but it was more accessible for more ordinary people. And the key to this monastic lifestyle was prayer and work. The Benedictine order of monks was based on Benedict's rule, and many other monastic orders as well. Now, he was not really a monk, but Origen of Alexandria, 184 to 254, is a great ascetic example. He took Jesus literally. In Matthew 19:12, Jesus said, "For there are eunuchs who are born that way, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others, and there are those who choose to live like eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. The one who can accept this should accept it." I think what Jesus seems to be saying there is, celibacy is good if you can live with that. Origen, however, took it quite literally and castrated himself. We have a lot more to say about monasticism later.